Laura has edited a lot of Robert's late work. When did you guys start working together?
Late 80s.
Yes. Okay, so that's a lot of work. And so you had said at one point when we were talking about this movie that it was an extension of the work that you did together, and it feels like it, but I'm wondering how it's different with you in the driver's seat, so to speak, as opposed to Robert.
Well, it was interesting to try to do something that would go with his work, but be different and not seem like a copy of his work. But that's a fine line. So I hope I was able to do that. But I think that the interesting thing is that I noticed that the work has changed, through the years. So we had to also change the look of the film to go along with that and to kind of drive from one to the other. So that was really fun to do.
To change the look of the film according to the way that the work
to kind of
looked?
imagine these different textures that would go with the different textures of, color mixed with black and white, 16 millimeter reversal, Bolex, the Super 8 that he shot. So it was sort of interesting to try to come up with something that would unify it, but yet kind of bend to all those things.
Did Robert buy in right from the start?
No, and neither did I.
Uh-huh.
Somebody had to convince me to do it. I met somebody who started insisting that I do this film.
Right.
And I said, no, I work with Robert. I'd feel really weird, doing a film about him. It would be completely different. And then I started thinking about it and coming around, and the same thing happened with him. I brought it up to him, and he was like, no. And then I, dropped it. And then by the end of the conversation, he was like, come back tomorrow, we'll talk about that. And then, like I was leaving, he goes, come back tomorrow, really, so it was kind of like that.
But it's a film that you found the form of as you went along, and you were in the cutting room for a long time with this movie.
Yes, yeah, and the thing is that he said, as soon as, we agreed to the film, he's like, oh, come and start shooting tomorrow, so I was like, crazy, just got, a crew together and started doing it almost immediately. And I didn't really do a lot of research. So I thought I knew him well enough to do it. But then suddenly it seemed like there were all these things that I needed to know more about. So I kind of did it in the editing room and then kind of went back and shot more. We also had to shoot all the stills and also incorporate all the films and ephemera. So that became a consideration. It took a while to figure that out. But it was fun to do.
Yeah.
I have to say, looking at all the books and sort of decoding the work was really fun.
Yeah, that's a lot of work.
It's very, very dense. And in order to get context that wasn't giving everything away, like I didn't want to give everything away because then it just takes the life out of it. But that's also a fine line, to sort of give enough so that people can keep going but not give it all away so that you ruin the work when they see it.
Yep.
It's very important to me.
Any questions? Yeah, right, Jim. 1 second.
Thank you so much for this film. It's, for all us older New Yorkers, it's so full of memory.
Thank you for saying that.
Robert, one of the quotes is, I love mistakes, sometimes they work out. I wondered how in this work that has some meaning.
Oh, for me? Well, one of the biggest mistakes I did was ask some of the questions that guy did in the film. So, and also, to ask about the stones was not a big moment, as you could see in the film, but I think it was kind of funny because, it's just the one thing. Robert actually, we started projecting that projection, and I said, oh, let's talk about the stones now. And he sat in front of it and then said, I hate when people shoot stuff like this. And I was like, oh, okay, I guess it's the end of the shoot now.
But does that mean it's a mistake, or does it just mean that it's something that Robert has reacted?
It's not, I guess it's not necessarily a mistake. It was, the whole thing about the film is it was very organic the way it worked, too. It was sort of like tacking in a sailboat where we kind of went a little ways this way, and then we went that way, and kind of found our way a little bit. But yeah, the mistakes were, I did start the film without research and then did the research later, so I did ask some questions, and then later on, Robert was like, oh, you're asking better questions now, and I was like, yeah, I found out those other questions that other people ask you aren't, your favorite. So.
That question is, does an editor make mistakes?
The great thing about, fix it in the post, that's what everybody always says, but as you pointed out, it takes longer when you do that. Yeah. But I also think that because of the way we shot it, we found found the film, and it just took a bit longer to do that. And I think that it was more interesting to do it that way. It was a better process, I think, too, because we had the luxury of just, not shooting one day if, things didn't work out. And
I think editors do make mistakes.
they do, actually, but you don't.
Shows in different ways. Yep. Wait for the mic.
There's another answer to that question. There are no mistakes.
There you go.
Thank you for the film. What are your fears when you're making a film like this, when you know someone so well, and you know his quirks, and you know his moods? What do you fear? Because you've taken the project and you would like to complete it. When he told you, for instance, we're in the tunnel, and then it's going to start. I didn't know which tunnel I was in. I was following you, but I didn't know which tunnel. And I had a fear that I wanted to stay in the tunnel and not go out into the light.
Well, the biggest fear that I had was that it would turn out to be a film where I was just idolizing Robert, and it was all about Robert, the great master, and this, grim figure, or whatever. He really doesn't really enjoy being idolized, that I know of, and that was something I didn't want to do, and that was something I really tried to avoid. So hopefully I did avoid that.
Seems like it.
But that was my biggest fear, actually. And it's hard not to, there were a couple times in making this where I started reading the books and I started learning about him, and then I would go to lunch with him and I would kind of like sideways look at him like, oh my God, like, I know him. And then I was like, oh, stop doing that.
But the through line in the movie is him insisting on staying away from definitive judgments, from
Right.
assessments, from all that stuff that's part of like Portraits of Great Men, and that's part of who he is, and that's something that's present throughout the movie.
Oh, good. Because I think that was my fear, and I think that's probably, I don't want to speak for him, but I'd say that probably is one of a fear that he does have, is being idolized, or anytime he does begin to become idolized, I know he kind of tries to change or something.
Wait for the mic. Oh, do you have the mic?
It was really nerve-wracking.
The question's, what was it like watching the finished product with Robert? God.
It was pretty nerve-wracking. And I watched it with, I had to set up like a whole little AV, because their basement, I had to bring in the monitor, bring in the speakers, and I had to find like an extension cord. There's not that many 3-prong plugs down there. And, I had to set up this whole little center.
Up in Nova Scotia or at
In New
Bleecker Street?
York.
Yeah.
It was right before they were leaving for Nova Scotia. And of course, they get more phone calls and visitors than anyone I know. So it's sort of like constant phone calls, constantly people trying to come in. So, but it was really nerve-wracking, but I was so happy when they were enjoying the film, I could tell. And at the end, they said, maybe you should show some other people too, but I think it's good. So.
I want to ask you about, what's absolutely the most delicate, aspect of making a movie about Robert, which is how to deal with the deaths of his children. And that must have, I can imagine that must have been a really particularly fraught, sensitive area for you.
Yes, I really, really worked hard to get that right, and that was that took a long time to edit those sections, because in a film of this length to have so much of that happen, and it's just hard to edit, to kind of go in and go out, and then still kind of have the film show the type of personality that I wanted in Robert. But the other thing too that I really feel like his work is really a lot about his children, and a lot about how that happened to him, and he's very good at showing his innermost feelings in his work. So I felt that his work was a way more, a better way, a more poignant way to show it, to portray that. And I think that.
But even having said that, you're constructing something with his work, so it's
Right.
still you.
Right, yeah. So I did that. I mean, I tried to, especially with the Pablo, it was a bit difficult because it was something that happened over a series of so many years. And, you know, the other thing with, I didn't want the children to just be this issue that came up and then went away. Like, I really wanted them to feel like characters in the film from the beginning. And you got to know them a bit, and I think that's a more respectful way of doing it.
You got microphones coming from both sides. There you go.
The real question. I mean, this film is brilliant, and that you did this is extraordinary. Those of us who know the man through the Americans, which I can't tell you how many times in various museums, either in the US or abroad, there will be the entire Americans, there'll be some of it, etc. But they're never contextualized, I think, you'll tell me if I'm wrong, they're never contextualized in his life. One sees the Americans. So we come here today to see the Americans. You begin with the Americans. The rest of this is all unknown to us. We're academics, we're not in this territory. But am I right that the Americans have so dominated the public vision, view, reputation of him that the rest of this is almost lost?
That's why I started with the Americans, because I wanted to use it as a departure point into the other work and to show that, you know, he moved on from it. But then you see in the middle of the film where, you know, people don't want to stop talking about the Americans and asking him about the Americans. So, you know, I guess I would like for people to be turned on by his other work. I mean, with the scratching on the negatives is such an intense thing to me, I think. And to see the videos and to see, you know, his Polaroids and some of his other work, I think it's strong, it holds up, in my opinion. So I think to use the Americans, and I think that this is probably what happened to him too. It enabled him to do all this other stuff. And I'm hoping that it opens the door for other people too, to see his other work.
The other thing is that he's created with the Americans, and then kind of to a certain extent, Pull My Daisy, made with Alfred Leslie. I mean, two works that are so big and canonical that they're almost bigger than him. In a
Right.
way. You know, they've almost taken on a life of their own, really.
Right,
Yeah.
it's true.
Yeah.
I mean, there was a few years ago the 50th anniversary of
Right.
the Americans, which was like a huge show, and it went everywhere. And it was a huge book. Like, you know, Robert gave me the book, and I had to go leave it at my friend's house because I couldn't carry it. It was so heavy, you know, and it has all the contact sheets and everything in it. And I think it's an amazing.
It was a great show.
It's a great show, and it's a great book. And those contact sheets that we looked at, they're like so huge. It was amazing looking at all of them with Robert. I mean, it went on for 2 days. I looked at them, so I have like lots and lots of footage that, you know, I couldn't fit in the film, but it's kind of amazing. So.
One sec, Jim. Let me just. You had somebody else in the back. Yeah.
Mhm.
Me? I especially liked the music.
Oh, thanks
and
for mentioning that.
I wondered how you arrived at the music and how you worked with Hal Wilner.
Oh, yeah. He was great. Hal Wilner and Rachel Fox came on board, and they really made all this music possible because original music is really hard to use, especially on a documentary budget. But I kind of felt like I had to have music that stood up to the photographs. And I didn't want anyone to talk over the photographs. I wanted the photographs to kind of come alive. And the way to do that, obviously, is with music. And so you can't do that necessarily with score that's all sort of the same. I also wanted to have that very different feeling from one era to the next. So they were wonderful to work with. And I didn't necessarily also want every single song to be from that era. I wanted to sort of interpret a little bit what the photographs were trying to do, more of the feeling of the photographs. Like I feel like the Velvet Underground over the early New York photographs has that feeling of New York, you know, rather than being literally from that time. So.
I thought the music, the energy of the music really captured the real person that we see of Robert, because so much of how he's seen by people who look at the Americans is a darkness. And what you brought to life is the person. And I wondered just how willing he was so funny and playful. And how did that work within your structure of the film?
Well, once you get to know Robert, I think he doesn't open up, obviously, to everybody. But once you get to know him, you realize he's a very, very funny person. And, we had so much fun on these shoots when we went on to take photographs and we went out in the car. It was, at the end of the night, we were all saying, goodbye, goodbye. It's sort of like the end of the film, goodbye, because we all had such a good time. So I wanted to sort of show that, and I do think that anytime there is a darkness or a sadness, to have also humor, it really helps, and I think it helps to have that kind of up and down and that contrast in a film. It gives you more feeling either way. It's funny because I talked to Sid Kaplan, the darkroom guy, yesterday, and I go, oh, I think maybe I got Robert's sense of humor in the film and people are liking that. He goes, yeah, it's kind of a dark sense of humor. It's gallows humor, but, because he does have sometimes a very dark sense of humor.
But his films seem, I think it's true of his photography too, that it's funny, dark, light, serious, tragic, exultant, all at the same time. That that's
Right.
what the that kind of homemade feeling is that he's going for, of things that are kind of inventing themselves as they go.
Right. Yeah. One of the quotes that I read recently, which I thought was great, he said, "It's not the decisive moment. It's not the beginning or the end. It's kind of a middle where I'm not sure." So it's like a question, which is one of the things I really like about his work. The other thing too is that I think that his photographs aren't necessarily what you said, not necessarily dark or light. They're just what it is, and what he's feeling at the time. It isn't beautiful, it isn't ugly, it's just what it is.
I always feel with his photographs that there's this sense that he's erasing something and then recreating it and erasing it again. And I wonder if you felt that and if that influenced perhaps your editing of the film.
That's really interesting thing to say. I do feel like that, and I do feel that in his work, and that's why I think it was important to have each part of the film be a little bit different. Where we start out like sort of black and white with the Americans, and then we kind of move into this sort of like wacky, 60s, 70s world, and then of course, the later videos in like 80s, 90s, 2000s. So I think, yeah, it's important to sort of move forward, I think, and don't look back.
Are there distribution plans for the film?
Well, yeah, thank you. Definitely. They're not solidified yet, but
If anybody
they're a
wants
little
to make an
liquid
offer.
at the moment.
Yeah, go ahead.
Are there archival plans for that incredible collection of his? And then I assume he would want to have input in how they're put together. Archival plans for his photographs.
For his photographs,
and everything else he has there.
well,
His
Robert's
postcard.
work is pretty well spoken for, right?
It's pretty well spoken for. I mean, the great thing is that he donated all of his negatives to the National Gallery. So, that's not all of his negatives. I shouldn't say all of his negatives. I think up to a certain year he donated the negatives to the National Gallery. So they're up, for the public to see. And then Pace McGill, his gallery, they do a lot of stuff. And I just worked with Steidel, publisher, doing a lot of his films and videos. And I think a DVD set is going to come out of
So
that.
the videos are all spoken for, they're preserved, and because that's the work that seems very fragile to me.
Yes,
the
yeah.
stuff shot on
They're
high-8.
preserved up to a certain point, but as we know, these days it's really hard to say that with everything being, digital and virtual, and So, so Steidl is going to be putting something out, and they are being archived up to a certain point. So, and then they're going to have a home, but I'm not at liberty to say.
And the rights for Candy Mountain were kind of fuzzy for a while, weren't they?
They were fuzzy for a while, but they're owned by Vega Film in Switzerland, and actually we spoke to them, so they were pretty into putting it in this film. So that's cool.
Great.
So that's fun.
Yep. One more.
Just to clarify, Steidl's going to be publishing them as strips or as a DVD?
DVD.
Oh.
Oh, but also he has a whole project with the books, which is it's called the Robert Frank Project, and so he publishes. He's published, I think, all of his back books again, and then also new ones, which there are some really nice new ones as well.
Interesting. Thanks.
You're welcome.
Okay, we'll do one more. Yeah.
Just a quick thought. You had a section about his father and the house he lived in, and I wondered how you found that. And secondly, well, I'll stay with that.
Oh, okay. His father, that amazing book of photographs that his father did, was published by Steidl, and it's beautiful. I was kind of amazed that his father was just this amateur photographer and took these great pictures, and also wrote these little, like the poem that he translates in the film.
And I thought of the second question. You had the Living Theater there in
Yeah.
one section, which is a great group.
Yeah.
Early theater in New York when everything was in despair. I was wondering how much of Beckett he was aware of and if there were any influences from that kind of playwriting.
Oh, definitely. The film Keep Busy had an actor in it that worked a lot with Beckett, and so there was like a crossover there. And also he knew Julian, what's his name? Julian Beck from the Living Theater. When I first started working with Robert, I put that piece of Super 8 and something, he goes, oh, you put my friend Julian in the film. And I went, oh, I didn't know who he was. But, I was happy to do that. And since then, I've read a lot about the Living Theater, and what they did was very interesting.
Yeah.
So I think things like that in the film, I really tried to, include, and then anybody who wants to, who gets interested can just look them up and find out about them. There's little references, I think, in different,
Yeah, there's a lot of
places.
points of convergence between Robert and a lot of cross
lot of
paths
other
with a lot of
people.
people. Yep.
Yeah, which
Yeah.
I think is really interesting.
Thanks, Laura.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.